Yeah, no fear hippie here is here, and today we are gonna see what appears on my YouTube recommendations. We're gonna be watching a video by Carniv Carn Carnivorous Carnivorous. However you say pronounce their name, we're gonna be watching their video, and let's get into it.
Longest standing tugs of war in DBD is whether or not the game is killer sided or survivor
I feel
sided.
like I've
Neither
heard
side
them
is willing to back
before.
down against the other, despite the realization that they are definitely arguing with each other's brick wall. Not a single patch notes goes by without the comments being flooded with everyone from content creators to 100-hour Andes fighting over whether this patch favors them or is against them. And if you had asked me a few years ago, I'd have a definitive answer on if this game is one-sided or not. But now I'd say it's complicated. DBD's history in the horror category has stood strong against its competitors for 8 years for very obvious reasons. It's a juggernaut that hasn't been taken down by
True.
VHS, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Evil Dead, Identity V, Home Sweet Home, or Killer Clowns. Instead, it manages to prevail year after year despite hardships of disappointing chapters, patch notes, and reworks that leave many scratching their heads wondering if the devs truly play their game. While I can't get the statistics of how many hours the game developers have, what I can do is discuss the general player base and what they have to say. My main focus on today's video is to have a better understanding on what the general player base thinks about the current state of Dead by Daylight and whether it's survivor-sided, killer-sided, or finally balanced after all these years, plus the overall satisfaction in the developers' choices. With a
I
wide
always
range of
try to find
responses,
true
I surveyed
balance.
almost 200 players across different communities to see how they feel about the current state of the game. Within this showcase, I noticed that the biggest factors on people's decision wasn't necessarily about the role that they played, but what they've witnessed in DBD history. Within the survey, it was perfectly split between survivor mains, killer mains, and people who play both sides of the game. It also pooled from
Hmm.
people who have been playing DBD since beta to people joining the player base this year, or those who just consume DBD through content on YouTube or Twitch. The first few questions that were asked in the survey, besides playtime, was what killers people mained, as I feel that indicates how people experience DBD. People who main Blight or Nurse, notoriously S-tier killers, would have a different experience than those who main lower tier killers, like Myers or Freddy. I did find out that the majority of the people that do play or main killer tend to play killers requiring some semblance of skill expression, but not necessarily the most powerful killers, which was quite surprising. In my opinion, this leads to games with a higher difficulty tier and much less room for error than others. The top 3 most popular killers being surprisingly Unknown, Singularity, and Wesker. All killers that rank solidly in A tier but have a high skill ceiling requiring dedication to playtime. When it came to how they experienced the game,
Okay, I'm gonna stop the video right there for a second. I recognize where or her voice. She, I believe, did the survey before for like slugging versus tunneling, which I think Scott Jum watched, and I believe it's the same person. I'm not quite sure, but I think it is the same person. It was a really interesting survey, just talking about is slugging or tunneling better, or slugging or hooking, I mean. So let's get back into it.
killer mains tend to think that the game is balanced, but in a way that both sides have miserable shit to go against. Old Circle of Healing existing at the same time as Eruption was mentioned, but also the fact that the patches seem to swap with who gets favored with what, making the game eventually reach an equilibrium. Killer mains were most quick to acknowledge the fact that the game used to be survivor-sided, but changed with time. Some issues with patches were noted, most notably in 6.1 and 5.3, which we'll cover later, and a good chunk of responses. Some issues with balancing stem from how long certain things are problems within the game, focusing on either feeling like the devs don't acknowledge the changes they're implementing in the game to really know how things affect certain killers or how it feels to play on certain maps. Changes to help solo queue felt like a blow to lower tier killers whose playstyles have had to be adjusted. Taking away hook grabs, buffing certain items like toolboxes, but also nerfing popular aggression like pop and pain res, making it so that the amount of perks that can be utilized is getting smaller and smaller. As a result, killer meta now feels stale, but also the amount of leeway that killers can get away with has gotten worse over the years, noting that the changes to survivor meta makes it so that they're much more efficient within the game. Second chance perks being more prevalent also makes killers more pigeonholed, as it can be harder to make up for time in lost trials. One of my favorite comments came from a Wesker main that noted that, "I feel like the side that brings the most broken stuff wins, but people tend to say it's more killer-sided due to how quickly survivors give up in solo queue." Surveyors that played lower tier killers like Legion or Dredge noted that their frustration and how much survivors got away with when their matches in regards to second chance perks being readily available and stackable without issues. The introduction to the gen kick limit meant that utilizing perks like Eruption became severely stunted, forcing M2 base killers not to have a good pick of regression compared to their M1 base counterparts. On the opposing side, Survivor mains think that the game for the most part is killer-sided, citing that not only do the developers want a higher kill rate, but certain killers being buffed made the games more difficult amongst most survivors. Most commonly mentioned were overpowered killers like Nurse or Blight taking a long time to actually be nerfed and not being satisfied with the changes. Blight's original Eerie add-on changes were an issue on the initial PTB and were allowed to come to live despite the eventual nerf, but they're still an issue in the wrong hands. Despite the continuous nerfs that Nurse has faced, she is still miserable to go against for the majority of the player base, and the new Billy turned a beloved killer into a certifiable menace. The nerf to self-healing with medkits, Circle of Healing, and self-care makes solo queue harder as you now have to rely on finding teammates to reset, which can be difficult in the current meta. Certain playstyles that encourage more fun, such as flashlight saves, being made easier and taking away locker saves remove some skill expression from the game. Another notable issue is that what gets kill switched and what doesn't. Some feel like the perks that get kill switched are the ones that affect killers more than survivors. Others also feel as if the killers that come out make the game killer-sided, and how disappointing the reworks
True.
have been for more problematic killers such as Knight, Skull Merchant, Singularity, Billy, and Blight. Another issue that was raised was playstyles that are being encouraged. Proxy camping is also still an issue, making hook saves basically swaps or discouraging altruism altogether in solo queue. Killer add-ons like Soma's Family Photo cut through the built-in endurance mechanic, and Oak have to make saves with certain killers impossible. While it was not a question on the survey, according
True.
to statistics, the majority of the player base plays in either solo or duo queue as Survivor, forcing players to hope that they win the lottery of good teammates
Hmm.
or a fair or balanced killer. This bunch of luck
Interesting.
variance made the majority of Survivor mains feel like the game is killer-sided because of the amount that is against them as they ready up. Unsurprisingly, the people who play both sides think the game is
I do find it strange that people would solo queue as Survivor as often as they do. I feel like doing solo queue is probably like the most miserable way to play DBD. However, I guess a lot of survivors really don't care to learn killer too much, so that kind of makes sense. And killer can feel like constant pressure too.
pretty balanced as they see the ebbs and flows in playstyles comparatively. One of the more common mindsets in the category where people play both evenly is that most of their issues in the game stem from the fact that they feel like the devs have an inconsistent prioritization in-game, and they feel a bit tone deaf when it comes to in-game or PTB feedback.
True.
One comment stated that there are changes being made to both sides, but in doing so, they've really only lowered the skill ceilings rather than making the game balanced, forcing survivors and killers into unfavorable playstyles. Another comment, however, noted that their opinion has changed to become more survivor-sided because of the changes being made.
I will also say when she's talking about like the skill ceiling being lower, yeah, the skill ceiling on a lot of characters has been lowered. Um, I'm not really for. However, the thing is they're also not lowering the skill floor on a lot of characters, which kinda is very upsetting. Like for example, like the UI changes of survivors being able to see the UI, that helped lower the skill floor for survivor, which was drastically needed. And I feel like we still need to lower it lower where um to bridge that gap in between solo queue and Swiss, I feel like survivors should be able to see each other's perks. Um, not like during the match, but like loading into it, and if they're good at remembering, they can remember what each person has. I think that would be very, very handy. I think making it so that um, that's my main one. Making it so like killers like Nurse, I feel like the distance should be reduced of how far she can teleport uh, to or blink to. I feel like her distance should be reduced, but I feel like they should make like plaid add-on base kit. Why they haven't made it RA base kit is beyond me, because it's a very, very good add-on that allows for you to pick up the killer a lot quicker. So I feel like they should allow that. Um, let's get back into the video.
If survivors play optimally in terms of gen splits and stealth when necessary, there's not much that the killer can do without snowballing or relying on tunneling and camping. The asymmetrical nature of DVD means that it's destined to be survivor-sided, as 4 survivors can bring a styptic agent in maps like Eerie of Crows, where there is no killer equivalent for a loadout like that. One thing that was commented more in this category than Killer Main or
True.
Survivor Main is that they do acknowledge behavior needing to balance more around solo queue to make sure that they continue playing the game. One reply said that
Absolutely.
it was a necessary evil to make sure survivors are satisfied, since there needs to be a 4-to-1 ratio to keep the game going. Mentions of buffs to solo queue have helped the majority of the player base, but have hurt killers who haven't received any balancing attention from behavior or killers that rank lower than A tier. One reply noted that the Survivor meta directly counters unfavorable killer playstyles such as tunneling, camping, or slugging, but killers have been hit from nerfed regression perks, lack of hook grabs, lack of hatch grabs, limited to 8 gen kick regressions, and buffs to hook times overall. The frustrations in the game remain the
True.
same throughout the play preferences, as the changes that are being made are more stifling than they are
Wait,
balancing.
wait, wait,
Skill
wait.
expression is being
I gotta go rewind.
Killers have been hit from nerfed regression perks, lack of hook grabs, lack of hatch grabs, limited to 8 gen kick regressions, and buffs to hook times.
Okay, what icon is this? I don't think I've seen this in a game. It looks like it's. Is it from Freddy's Clocks? Where is this in the game? I don't think I've ever seen this, but it looks like it belongs in a game. It's such a cool piece of artwork. If anybody knows, I would love to find out because I love this picture of art. Very nice.
Overall. The frustrations in the game remain the same throughout the play preferences, as the changes that are being made are more stifling than they are balancing. Skill expression is being taken away, and while the game seems balanced, players are frustrated because their choices are becoming more and more limited on what they can do. When it comes to in-game usage, unsurprisingly, 90% of the replies stated that they ran meta perks on both Survivor and Killer. Someone is blatant to say that
Do
they just ran 4 regression and 4 second chance perks, but others went more in-depth on their build, citing that they utilized the meta to make up for what their day-to-day games lacked. Most of the perks mentioned regression, second chance, looping, or healing, but very few mentioned more fun playstyles. Some notably mentioned going for lore accuracy or foregoing perks altogether, but 9 times out of 10, meta is going to be run in-game as to combat the fact that the other side will bring in their best perks as well. One of the more fun things mentioned about dev decisions was that the players appreciated the Chaos Mode randomizer, as it not only took the pressure off of what was being run, but made it so that builds were the last thing on people's minds, and focused on either
I did love a chaos shuffle because of everybody was on an even playing field with everybody having random perks. Me personally though, like I'm a control freak, and even though I know like all the perks, and it was really cool showing off my knowledge with using all the perks and calling it out to my teammates of what each perk was. I didn't really particularly enjoy it too much because I'm a control freak. I like to build and adjust my perks. So Chaos Shuffle is like one of my worst nightmares. It's like playing a gun game in COD. I hate it. I hate it so much.
chase or altruism rather than regression. This is one thing I did really enjoy about 2v8 as well, as that it was more about chase and not about perks. For playtime in game, the more games you played, the more balanced the game was in people's eyes. This could be due to the comparison of what games were like when they were first cited to now. Those who had less than 1,000 hours in game leaned towards the games being survivor sided, but as playtime increased, so did the equilibrium of the game being more balanced than one sided or other. This was expected, as I think that while the amount of hours in game doesn't necessarily equate to how much skill you have, those first 1,000 hours have to cover so much knowledge between 38 killers, almost 300 perks, and 44 maps in game that you most likely haven't come across every combination and its effectiveness in that playtime. While I'm not saying there aren't good players that have sub 1,000 hours, I think you haven't really scratched the surface as to what can happen in game,
Gee, I
other
don't
than
even
just
feel like
certain
you
situations
scratched the
based on
surface
that
at
time frame. So you
2,000
can feel some sort of
hours.
ignorant bias to the standing and balancing of this game. Within the playtime variants, patches 5.3 and 6.1 were mentioned by name. Starting with patch 5.3, this was in my opinion one of the most definitive changes to the game and what kind of solidified in my eyes a divide within the community. Michaela Reed, all jokes aside, is a chapter that began the downfall and the change of old party game DBD into the new age competitive DBD that we play today. If you didn't play Killer or DBD in general during the time of original Circle of Healing, sometimes it felt as if there was nothing that could be done for lower tier killers. 100% self-healing speed for 3 in-game months before being changed to 75%, and then finally 50% self-healing with patch notes 5.7. The perk then remained unchanged for a full year until patch note 6.7 in April of 2023, where it took away the survivor's ability to heal themselves in-game, instead relying on their teammates once more, shifting the dynamic from an every man for himself to a more altruistic playstyle, which is the general theme of what the developers are looking for in-game. Patch
I love
6.7
her
is
music.
most
Her
notably the
music's
patch
very
where the most
nice.
popular killer regression perks were reworked or nerfed alongside how survivors are able to heal themselves in-game by changing healing interactions and medkit math. Those that toted themselves between whether this game was survivor-sided or killer-sided noted this perk and this patch note the most, as it really shifted the dynamic survivors had between each other and how much more killers were able to snowball or keep the entire team on their toes. Everyone understands the pain of having 4 survivors injured and then having their adrenalines pop after the last patch,
Mm-hmm.
making everyone healthy again. Original Circle of Healing felt the same way, but throughout the
It
entire
is.
game, as the second a survivor was able to be out of line of sight for a killer for 10 seconds, they were completely reset, ruining any and all chase progress for the killer. This is to not discredit the frustration of other perks like Made for This or killers like Knight or Skull Merchant, but the older player base noted these changes more than the newer players. Another patch note that was noted was the complete meta
Ah.
shakeup of 6.1, changing over 20 of the most commonly used perks between both sides, but also adjusting killer or survivor interactions in game. Gens now took 90 seconds instead of 80, killers were gifted a better hit cooldown and kick speed as well as changes to bloodlust. In exchange, survivors were gifted built-in borrowed time. Some survivor mains noted that they felt that this patch was not as fair for survivors, making them feel overall neglected by behavior's decision, as the more popular meta such as self-care, botany, dead hard, and decisive were taken while killers received an overall buff to the majority of their perks. It's not to say that killer perks like Tinker and Corrupt were not adjusted comparatively, but it was noted that this patch note also began a very rough time for survivors with the changes being made to gen kicking in general. The over-eruption meta of Call of Brine, Overcharge, Pop, and Eruption was one of the most painful times in DBD history, making the games come to an impossible standstill and left most solo queue survivors feeling helpless. With all that being said, I think the game is as balanced as it's ever been, but history soured people's opinion of the game and there's no going back. Noted within the
True.
survey was that people's faith in the dev seems to be lost, and consistently on social media, it feels as if people think that the developers don't play their game. From killer changes, perk reworks, changes to maps that feel unwarranted while problem maps continue to be ignored or delayed, very few responses actually trusted what the developers have in mind for the game and its future. Several responses also noted the frustration that metas feel as the developers take too long adjusting the newest perks in a DLC, most notably Made for This or Weave Attunement, until all the money that can be made has hit their imaginary threshold. But when comparing the game's changes, there is a give and take on both sides in an attempt to reach equilibrium. The developers themselves had noted a reference for at least a 60% win rate or kill rate for killers, which can be showcased utilizing Nightlight's recent kill rates. About 20% of killers hit the 60% kill rate threshold, while the rest are about 50% or above. It is noted that 3 killers out of that 20% are all killers that are slated to be adjusted throughout this year: Hillbilly, Skull Merchant, and Sadako, with Dredge and Knight also having been part of that
Yeah, they already
percentage and having
changed
just
those,
been
I think,
changed. Maps
currently.
have always been my issue within the game, and we've seen unwarranted changes to Macmillan, Coldwind, and Ormond, but maps like Garden of Joy, Crotus Pren, Swamp, Leary's, Preschool, and Meat Plant have received little to none balancing changes over the years, despite these maps having the most noted issues amongst responses. The game is balanced, but not in a positive manner, and that's the most unfortunate takeaway from my personal playtime and the responses being made. People are upset, and while behavior has made good changes in recent years compared to the game's history, they seem to just be missing the mark. Perks that exist in one state on the PTB are changed, but then others that raise concerns seem to stay the same with no changes in sight. Killers are introduced one way on the PTB, then come to live servers completely different with little to no explanation, such as Knight most recently, leading those killer mains to lose passion for what kept them in the game in the first place. I would like to see this game continue on for many years to come, but as time has gone by, many players have lost faith in the game, and it's an issue of trust that behavior doesn't seem to be doing its best at earning back. People have been begging for years for a balanced game, but many don't seem to like the end result, but that is a discussion for another time. The overall consensus is that the game is balanced, but not as fun as it used to be. This could be an opinion tainted by nostalgia, or maybe the fact that some people's fun came at the expense of others, and now it's no longer an option. But for the most part, the game is the most balanced that it's ever been. There were requests for other game modes, changes to overall killer designs, and there were requests for a change in matchmaking to have a better focus on skill expression, but it's undeniable that the devs have tried to make this game as playable as possible for a wide range of skill sets that the game players have. If you still have the opinion that the game is killer-sided or survivor-sided, I would recommend that you have a more introspective look as to why you think that, especially if you only played one time in the game and not realize what the other side has to offer.
And
Okay, so make sure you like and subscribe to me, help me out get YouTube Premium, and then we won't have commercial breaks. But back to her video and what she's talking about. Okay, I don't know why that one immediately popped up. I kind of want to give my thoughts and opinions watching it now. So I will say that I feel like they let me give my perspective. I came into the game when Armrio came out, just still barely at the end of the Circle of Healing meta. I absolutely hated Circle of Healing back then just because I played nothing but Armrio and Freddy. So it was miserable just hit a survivor and then they instantly heal up no matter what. And not even knowing like where to find the boons. Even as somebody who's put like 4,000 hours into this game, I can still get confused. Like, hey, where is the boon located? I know most of the common bean spots, but every now and again I'll run into one. I'll be like, oh shoot, I don't know where it is, just 'cause it's so random. Um, but I will say I believe this game it started off very, very Survivor side, especially with Matt Kote's um event he had up against the Japanese team. Um, the director of behavior literally got beat by a Japanese team, and embarrassingly so, where I don't even think he got like his, I think he get 1K, and he just got blinded. He got looped on infinites, and it was just an embarrassing showcase. So definitely it was Survivor side back then. Um, I'm not sure when like the meta started to change though, because right now I will say that I feel like the game is very, very killer sided at low MMR, and intermediate MMR I feel like is still slightly killer side. But as soon as you get into high MMR and more so into competitive, especially when you get into competitive, it's extremely survivor sided. So there's a lot of duality, and I feel like a lot of reasons that happens is because the gap in between solo queue and Swift is just so far apart. Like you can't even see them on a screen; they're so far apart. Um, so I think like bridging the gap in between solo queue and the Swifts would really, really help. Um, and I'm overall, I would say I will say I feel like the game is in a healthier place. I didn't really get to experience old school DBD like a lot of people did. I experienced just coming into it as all the graphical changes were changed, all the mounts were brighter and whatnot. And I never really experienced that, but I feel like it's probably in the healthiest state it's ever been in. And there's a lot of variety of perks you can run. I'm not too happy with my biggest issues is I'm not too happy with the mangled hemorrhage nerf. I feel like they shouldn't be tied to a time span. I feel like they should last indefinitely until you're healed. Maybe lower the percentage, but I don't feel like it should be indefinitely. That's a really, really big issue I find. It would be cool if you had like maybe a severe mangled where that's effect where it takes extra time. I think that would allow some more play styles to come into meta other than just gym regression for the killers. Um, so I think that would be pretty good. I know they are gonna be reworking Deep Wound here coming up pretty soon in the next like 3 months, I believe. So maybe that will play into it. We will see. Um, but I do feel like the game's in a healthy place. I love playing this game. I know a lot of people feel like it's lost its heart, but this game to me, I feel my heartbeat for this game. Ever since I started playing, I just truly enjoy it, and I enjoy it more than ever. I enjoy just playing on stream, making my YouTube videos, and it's always just such a good time. I really, really do see this game progressing far into the future, and I hope more new players play, and that this game can be more accessible and friendly towards newer players and friendly towards our solo queue players. But anyways, that's all I got to say today. I really did enjoy this video, just talking in depth about everything that makes DVD, and kind of the history of it as well. So make sure you give Carnivorous a like and follow. They're an excellent content creator, and I hope everybody has a great and wonderful day. And I will see y'all in the fog. Bye bye.